Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. The crystal glasses clinked as Richard Carmichael raised his drink. To my son Julian, who turned a small architectural firm into one of the city's most respected companies, his voice carried across Julian Mercer's dining room, where family and friends gathered around the mahogany table. Julian, seated at the head of the table, nodded in appreciation. At 34, he built his reputation brick by brick, just as he designed his buildings with precision and unwavering dedication. His fiancée, Isabella Monroe, sat beside him, her diamond engagement ring catching the light of the chandeliers. And to Isabella, Richard continued, his expression softening. In just a few days, you'll officially become part of our family. After losing Julian's mother so young, it warms my heart to see him find such happiness. The guests raised their glasses in unison. Julian squeezed Isabella's hand under the table, unaware of how she subtly tensed at his touch. I remember when Julian was just starting. Richard shared with the group. He'd worked through nights, sketching designs on any scrap of paper he could find. Now look at him. The Mercer Architecture Group employs over 50 people. Dad, please. Julian chuckled, but pride colored his voice. You're making me sound like some kind of workaholic. Because you are, darling. Isabella interjected, her tone playful but with an undercurrent of something else. Though I suppose that's what made you so successful. The conversation flowed freely as servers brought out the main course. Julian had spared no expense for this pre-wedding dinner, though the upcoming ceremony would dwarf this gathering in both size and cost. Julian insisted on donating a significant portion of last quarter's profits to the Sunnydale Children's Hospital. Richard mentioned to the group, just as his mother would have done. Isabella's smile remained fixed in place, but her fingers drummed against her thigh. The motion didn't escape Victor Langston's notice. Julian's childhood friend and private investigator observed the subtle reactions around the table with professional interest. While the guests enjoyed their meal across town at the Savoy Bistro, a very different scene had played out earlier that day. Isabella twirled in front of a mirror, her mother, Beatrice Fairchild, appraising her daughter's reflection. "The wedding dress is divine, darling," Beatrice remarked, though she added, "I still think we could have found something more exclusive in Rome." Isabella's perfectly manicured nails traced the beadwork. Julian doesn't understand the importance of appearances. He thinks the local boutiques are perfectly fine. She spat the last words with unveiled contempt, to which Beatrice reminded her, "At least his bank account understands. Once you're married, you can educate him on proper taste or simply bypass his input altogether." The sales assistant approached with champagne, but Isabella waved her away. "I can't wait for this charade to be over. Playing the adoring fiancé is exhausting." "Just a few more days," Beatrice soothed. "Then you'll have access to everything you deserve." Later that evening, at Marco Bellini, Isabella slipped into a private booth where Marcus Donovan waited. His rakish good looks and expensive watch marked him as exactly the type of man she truly desired. "There's my girl," Marcus murmured, pulling her close for a kiss. "How was dinner with the architect?" Isabella rolled her eyes, wiping her lips. "Dreadful." Another evening of hearing about his humble beginnings and how hard he worked. She mimicked Julian's earnest tone. "I swear, if I have to listen to one more story about his mother's charitable spirit." Marcus traced patterns on her wrist and said, "Think about the payoff, baby. Julian's company alone is worth millions, not counting his personal assets." I know, Isabella sighed, leaning into him. "But sometimes I wonder if we should have targeted someone less involved. He wants to know everything about where I'm going, who I'm meeting. It's suffocating." "That's because he actually loves you." Marcus smirked. "Poor fellow has no idea what's coming." Their laughter mingled with the restaurant's ambient noise as they plotted their future. Neither noticed the couple 2 tables over, one of whom worked for Victor Langston. 3 years earlier at the annual Sunnydale Children's Hospital Gala, Julian stood near the bar, discussing a potential project with investors when Isabella entered the ballroom. Her emerald dress complemented her dark hair, and her practiced smile drew attention from across the room. "Who is that?" Julian asked a colleague, unable to look away. "Isabella Monroe. Her family used to have money, but I heard they lost most of it in bad investments. She works in art acquisitions now, I think." Julian watched as she navigated the crowd with grace, stopping to chat with key donors. When their eyes met, she held his gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. By the end of the night, they had shared 2 dances and exchanged numbers. "I've never met anyone like you," Julian had told her on their 3rd date, as they walked through the sculpture garden at the museum where she worked. "You understand both the artistic and business sides of my world." Isabella's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "I was raised to appreciate beautiful things, Julian, including ambitious men who create them." Julian's office buzzed with activity as his team prepared presentations for their newest client, a luxury hotel chain expanding along the coast. He rubbed his temples, fighting fatigue from juggling work demands with wedding preparations. "Mr. Mercer," his assistant inquired as she poked her head in. "Mr. Langston is here to see you." Victor Langston strode in with a casual demeanor at odds with the office's corporate atmosphere. "Looking rough, buddy. Wedding planning is taking its toll." Julian managed a tired smile. "Try coordinating a 300-person event while designing a 30-story hotel. I'm running on coffee and willpower." Victor settled into a chair, studying his friend. "You know, I've been meaning to ask about Isabella's guest list. Some interesting names there." Her mother insisted on inviting half the social register. Julian shrugged. "Why?" "Professional curiosity." Victor leaned forward. "A few of those names have crossed my desk before, not always in flattering contexts." "Come on, Victor, not everyone can be as squeaky clean as you and me," Julian replied. "I'm serious, Julian. Something feels off. Maybe I should." "Don't." Julian's tone carried a warning. "I know you're looking out for me, but Isabella is not some case to investigate. She's going to be my wife." Victor raised his hands in surrender, but concern lingered in his eyes. "Just be careful. That's all I'm asking. You've worked too hard to build this life." Later that evening, Julian remained at the office, reviewing contracts. Isabella had left her phone on his coffee table after stopping by for lunch. He barely noticed it until it buzzed with an incoming message. The screen lit up. Marcus with a heart emoji. Something in Julian's chest tightened as he picked up the phone. The message preview showed clearly, "Don't worry, baby. Her family's money is all we need. Once we're married, we'll make him disappear." Julian's hands trembled as he opened the phone. Isabella had mentioned her passcode once, never thinking he'd need it. More messages filled the screen, each one a dagger to his heart. "Marcus, you should see your place on his company board as a golden opportunity." Isabella, "Trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing." Julian's so desperate to make everyone happy. He never questions anything. "Marcus, just think. A few more days, and we can start moving pieces into place. The prenup won't matter once he's gone." The office seemed to shrink around Julian as he read message after message. 3 years of memories replayed in his mind, each now tainted by deception. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with rage. A text from Isabella herself appeared. "Left my phone at your office. Don't look at my surprise wedding plans." Julian set the phone down exactly as he found it, his face betraying nothing as he typed a response from her phone. "Found it. Too busy with work to snoop. See you at dinner tomorrow. Love you." He sat in silence for several minutes, his mind racing through options, the ruthless businessman in him surfacing. If they wanted to play games with his life, he would show them what it meant to truly lose everything. Across town, at an upscale bar, Isabella and Marcus occupied a secluded booth. Her fingers traced patterns on his chest as they talked. "I had to sit through another tedious dinner with his father," she complained, all about Julian's childhood and his precious mother's legacy. "I thought I would scream." Marcus captured her hand, kissing each finger, You're a better actress than you give yourself credit for. Julian doesn't suspect a thing, because he sees what he wants to see. Isabella's laugh held no warmth. You should have heard him the other day, talking about having children, as if I'd ever carry his child. Just stick to the plan. Marcus reminded her. Once you're married, we'll move carefully. No one will ever connect us to what happens to Julian. I almost feel sorry for him. Isabella amused, then grinned. Almost. Neither noticed the couple 2 tables over, one of whom worked for Victor Langston. Julian sat in his home study, surrounded by documents, bank statements, property deeds, and company shares, his entire financial empire laid bare. He began moving assets, creating new accounts, and shifting control structures. His phone buzzed. Victor Langston was requesting a meeting. Julian had already decided to bring his old friend into his confidence. He needed Victor's resources and, more importantly, his discretion. They met at Victor's office, a modest space that belied his company's success in private investigation. I need everything you can find on Isabella Monroe and Marcus Donovan, Julian stated without preamble. Every account, every connection, every skeleton in their closets. Victor's expression remained neutral. I was wondering when you'd ask. I've already started a preliminary investigation. Julian's eyebrows rose. You knew. I suspected. Certain patterns caught my attention. The way she isolates you from old friends, her sudden interest in company operations, her brother's gambling debts. What gambling debts? Julian asked. Victor pulled out a file. Spencer Reed. That's her brother. His significant money owed to some dangerous people started about 6 months before Isabella met you. Julian absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. She needed a solution to her family's financial problems. And you were it. Victor hesitated. There's more. Marcus Donovan isn't just her lover. He's been involved in multiple fraudulent schemes, never convicted, but his name keeps appearing in cases of wealthy marks who lost everything. I want them destroyed. Julian's voice carried deadly calm. Not just stopped, destroyed. Can you help me? I'll need time to gather concrete evidence. They're careful. They won't expect anything until after the wedding. We have time, Julian concluded. Over the next few days, Julian maintained his routine. He attended meetings, reviewed wedding details, and played the role of devoted fiancé. But beneath the surface, he was a man transformed. He documented every interaction with Isabella, recorded every call, saved every message. Each sweet nothing she whispered became evidence of her betrayal. Each time she touched him, he imagined her hands around his throat. At the rehearsal dinner, Julian watched Isabella work the room. She charmed his business associates, laughed at his father's jokes, and played the perfect bride-to-be. Only now did he notice how her eyes constantly tracked exits and valuables. Richard pulled his son aside during the evening. Something's bothering you. What makes you say that? I raised you, Julian. I know when you're calculating something behind those eyes. Dad, if someone betrayed you, betrayed everything we stand for, what would you do? Richard's expression hardened. I'd make sure they never had the chance to do it again. Julian nodded, decision crystallizing. I need your help, but first, I need to tell you what I discovered. As father and son talked in hushed tones, Isabella observed them from across the room. She nudged her brother, Spencer, who had already had too much to drink. Keep an eye on them, she muttered. Julian's been distant lately. You're paranoid. Spencer slurred. He adores you. That's what worries me. Men who adore women notice when their goddesses have weaknesses. The evening wound down, and guests departed with excited chatter about the upcoming ceremony. Julian kissed Isabella goodnight, tasting the lies on her lips. Later in his study, he reviewed Victor's latest findings. Isabella's debt problems ran deeper than suspected, and Marcus's criminal connections spread wider. The web of deceit had many strands, and Julian intended to use each one to strangle their plans. He opened his safe, adding new evidence to his growing collection. Tomorrow, he would begin the final preparations. The wedding would proceed, but not as Isabella and Marcus had planned. Julian stood at his window, ice clinking in his glass. 3 years ago, he had been a different man. Successful but soft, powerful but naive. Now he felt reborn and filled with cold fury, stripped of illusions. They thought his money made him weak, that his love made him blind. They would learn that the same drive that built his empire could tear their world apart. The wedding was 2 days away. Soon, they would understand exactly who they had chosen to betray. The Regent Hotel buzzed with activity as hundreds of guests filed into the grand ballroom. White roses and orchids adorned each table, their fragrance mingling with the anticipation in the air. Julian adjusted his bow tie in the groom's suite, his expression unreadable as his father, Richard, helped with his cufflinks. "You don't have to go through with this, Richard," Julian murmured. "We could end it now." Richard said quietly, "They need to feel secure, overconfident. When they fall, they'll fall in front of everyone they try to impress." The door opened and Victor Langston slipped in. Everything set. Detective Amelia Carter and her team are in position, dressed as guests. Marcus is here too, sitting near the back. Perfect. Julian checked his watch. In the audio system, tested twice. Crystal clear. Victor hesitated. "You know she'll try to deny everything, right? Let her try." Julian's voice carried steel beneath its calm surface. "I have enough evidence to bury them both." In the bridal suite, Isabella preened before the mirror as her mother, Beatrice, fussed with her veil. The designer gown cost more than most people's cars, but you insisted on nothing less. Beatrice exclaimed, "In a few hours, you'll be Mrs. Mercer." Beatrice beamed. "All that wealth, all those opportunities." Isabella snapped, "If you keep talking about it, someone might hear." She touched up her lipstick and practiced her innocent smile. "Where's Marcus?" she inquired. "Already seated, as planned. Spencer's keeping watch." Beatrice lowered her voice. "Are you sure about the timing? If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong." Isabella's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Julian's too besotted to suspect anything. Soon he'll give me everything I want." And then she drew a finger across her throat with a soft laugh. The wedding march began, and guests rose as the doors opened. Isabella glided down the aisle, a vision in white. Her smile remained fixed as she approached Julian, who waited at the altar with appropriate adoration in his eyes. The priest began the ceremony, his words echoing through the ballroom. When he reached the crucial moment, he turned to Julian. "Do you, Julian Mercer, take Isabella Monroe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Julian met Isabella's gaze and said, "Actually, I have something I'd like to share first." Before Isabella could react, Julian pulled out a small remote. The ballroom speakers crackled to life, and her own voice filled the air. "Don't worry, baby. Her family's money is all we need. Once we're married, we'll make him disappear." The color drained from Isabella's face as more recordings played, her conversations with Marcus, discussing their plans, mocking Julian's love, plotting his downfall, all laid bare before the stunned audience. "I've been collecting these for weeks," Julian announced, his tone conversational but his eyes burning with controlled rage. "Would you like to hear the part where you and Marcus planned how to access my accounts? Or perhaps the discussion about which poison would be hardest to trace?" Beatrice swayed on her feet as her daughter's true nature was exposed. Marcus tried to slip away but found his path blocked by 2 large men from Victor's security team. "You see," Julian continued, addressing the shocked guests, "Miss Monroe and Mr. Donovan have quite a history of targeting wealthy marks. But they made one crucial mistake." He stepped closer to Isabella, who backed away. "They chose someone who values loyalty above all else." Detective Amelia Carter emerged from the crowd, badge in hand. "Isabella Monroe, Marcus Donovan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and multiple other charges that will be added as we proceed." Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Isabella's composure shattered as she screamed, "You're lying. He's making it all up." Spencer, his face contorted with rage, launched himself at Julian. "You scoundrel. I'll kill you." However, Julian's security team intercepted him smoothly, pinning him to the ground. In the confusion, Isabella's father appeared at her side. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a service entrance, an escape route they had planned for a different scenario entirely. Marcus, seeing his chance, broke away from the distracted security and followed. Julian watched them flee, his expression unchanged. He turned to Victor, who already had his phone out. "They're taking the east exit. Teams 2 and 3 are in position." But Isabella and her accomplices had prepared well. A car waited in the service alley, engine running. They piled in as shouts echoed behind them, and Marcus barely made it before the vehicle peeled away. This wasn't supposed to happen. Marcus panted in the backseat. How did he know? "Quiet," Isabella snapped. "Just quiet and let me think." Her father navigated through back streets, avoiding main roads. "We need to get to the safe house. We can regroup there." "No," Isabella snapped. "They'll expect that. Head north toward the lake house." Meanwhile, in the hotel ballroom, Julian calmly addressed the stunned guests. "I apologize for the disruption. Please enjoy the reception. The food shouldn't go to waste." He joined Detective Carter and Victor in a side room, where monitors showed traffic camera feeds. "They're heading north," Victor reported. "Just as we predicted, all their obvious bolt holes are watched." Detective Carter added, "We have teams ready at each location." Julian nodded. "They'll avoid them all." Isabella is not stupid, scared, but not stupid. She'll try something unexpected. He pulled out his phone and dialed Richard. "Dad, I need you to contact Judge Phillips. It's time to freeze all their accounts." In the fleeing car, Isabella's phone buzzed with notifications. Her face went white as she read them. "My accounts. They're all locked. Even the offshore ones." Marcus confirmed, panic rising in his voice. "How did he get access?" "Those were under false names." "Because he's been playing us," Isabella realized, fury and fear warring in her voice. "All this time we thought we were the hunters." They switched cars twice, using vehicles that Isabella's father had prepared months ago, but with each move, their options narrowed. Police vehicles appeared with increasing frequency, forcing them down specific routes. "They're hurting us," Isabella's father said grimly. "With each turn, we have fewer choices." Isabella's mind raced. Everything she'd planned, every detail she'd arranged, had been turned against her. The man she had dismissed as a love-struck fool had orchestrated her complete destruction. Back at his office, Julian reviewed the surveillance feeds with cold satisfaction. "How long until they run out of fuel?" Victor reported, "The car has about half a tank, maybe 2 hours at most." "Perfect," Julian murmured, studying the map. "They'll head for the warehouse district. It's the only area with enough cover to hide a vehicle and access to the river." He turned to Detective Carter. "Your teams are in position at each exit point." She confirmed, "They can run, but they're just choosing which trap to fall into." Julian's phone rang with Isabella's number. He put it on speaker, calling to surrender. Isabella snarled, "You think you're so clever? You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually, I do," Julian replied calmly. "I know about the insurance policy you took out on me, the offshore accounts, and the other men you've ruined. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate once I discovered your true nature? I loved you once," Isabella tried, switching tactics. "We could still—" "No," Julian cut her off. "You loved what I could give you, and now I'm going to take everything from you, just like you planned to do to me." He ended the call and turned to Victor. "Make sure that recording gets to the DA. Let's add attempted witness manipulation to the charges." Julian sat in his office, surrounded by screens displaying surveillance feeds, financial records, and police reports. Over the past hours, He had systematically dismantled the lives that Isabella and Marcus had built on lies. "Their credit cards are dead," Victor reported, hanging up his phone. "I've also contacted their other potential marks. It seems you weren't the first wealthy man they targeted, but I'll be the last." Julian reviewed a document. "The DA's office is adding charges based on those other cases." Detective Carter's team had found quite a paper trail once they knew where to look. Richard entered, carrying files. "I've spoken with the SEC. They're very interested in Marcus's investment schemes. It turns out he's been running a side business defrauding clients, and Isabella's family. Beatrice is hysterical, claiming she knew nothing. The Royal Club has already revoked her membership." Richard's smile held no warmth. Amazing how quickly the social climbers fall when their leverage disappears. Victor's phone buzzed. "They've abandoned the car. Trying to move on foot through the industrial district." Julian checked the time. "They'll be tired, desperate, starting to turn on each other." He stood, straightening his tie. Time to meet with Detective Carter. At the police command center, Detective Carter greeted them with new information. "We found their last vehicle. They took some supplies but left in a hurry. There was blood in the back seat. It looks like they're fighting among themselves." Julian mused. Marcus is realizing Isabella led him into a trap. He always was a survivor. He'll turn on her to save himself. Meanwhile, in an abandoned office building, the Fugitives' alliance crumbled. "This is your fault," Marcus shouted, shoving Isabella. "You said he was an easy mark, just another rich fool we could bleed dry. Back off." Spencer stepped between them, but Marcus was beyond reason. "Do you know what you've done?" Marcus's voice rose hysterically. "My contacts won't touch me. My accounts are frozen. You've destroyed everything. Keep your voice down." Isabella's father hissed. "They'll hear us." But Marcus wasn't finished. "I should turn myself in. Tell them everything. Maybe they'll." The crack of Isabella's slap echoed through the room. "You pathetic coward. After everything we've done, you want to give up. Look at us." Marcus gestured wildly, hiding in abandoned buildings, running from the police. "This isn't what I signed up for." "Then leave." Isabella spat. "Go crawl to Julian and beg for mercy. See how that works out for you." Julian's voice echoed in Marcus's mind. "I'm going to take everything from you." He had seen the cold fury in Julian's eyes at the wedding. There would be no mercy. In Julian's office, Victor reported their location, the 5th floor of the riverfront complex. "They're arguing. It seems the team is falling apart. Send in the tactical unit." Detective Carter ordered. "They're exhausted and emotional. It's the perfect time to move in." "Not yet," Julian countered. "Let them stew a bit longer. The more they fight among themselves, the easier they'll be to break during questioning." Richard studied his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've thought of everything." Julian replied, "They taught me an important lesson. Trust should be earned, not given, and betrayal should be punished without mercy." The screen showed 4 desperate figures, once confident in their schemes, now reduced to hiding in darkness. Julian had stripped away their money, their connections, their dignity. But he wasn't finished yet. "Release the information about their other victims to the press," he instructed Victor. "Let's make sure they never find another mark, even if they somehow escape justice this time." "Already done," Victor confirmed. "The story's breaking now. Their faces will be toxic in any social circle." Julian nodded in satisfaction. "Everything I've built, they tried to steal. Now I'll show them the true meaning of ruthlessness, not through violence, but through the complete and systematic destruction of their lives." The night wore on, and the net drew tighter. I watched through the cameras as my enemies turned on each other, their dreams of wealth and power crumbling into accusations and fear. Soon, they will face justice. But more importantly, they will live with the knowledge that they destroyed themselves by targeting the wrong man. "You were right about one thing, Isabella," Julian murmured to the surveillance image. "I'm not the man you thought I was." I'm much worse. Julian's office had transformed into a command center. Multiple screens displayed surveillance feeds, financial records, and police reports. Victor worked at a nearby desk, coordinating with his network of informants. Marcus's previous victims are coming forward, he announced, reviewing new reports. 5 so far, each case following the same pattern. A wealthy mark, a romantic entanglement, a mysterious accident. Julian absorbed this information with cold satisfaction. Forward everything to Detective Carter. I want these charges to stick. Richard entered, carrying a thick file. I've traced Isabella's hidden accounts through 3 shell companies. She thought she was clever, using her mother's maiden name. Send it to the SEC, Julian instructed. Let's add tax evasion to their charges. The phone rang. Detective Carter called with an update. We've got movement. They tried to access a safety deposit box at Premier Bank, missed them by minutes, but the bank's security footage is clear. They're getting sloppy. Julian noted, running out of resources. Detective Carter confirmed, down to their last options. Spencer tried to use his credit card at a gas station. Declined, of course. They're burning through cash fast. In a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, Isabella paced their small room while Marcus watched the parking lot for police. Their designer clothes were wrinkled, their polished appearances beginning to crack. He's hunting us like animals, Marcus muttered. No money, no contacts, no way out. Quiet, Isabella snapped. If you hadn't been so obvious about meeting me, we'd be in a better position. You're the one who couldn't wait to spend your money, always pushing for the wedding date, demanding more expenses. Spencer intervened before they could come to blows. Fighting won't help. We need a plan. Their father, once proud and commanding, sat defeated on the bed. What plan? Julian has destroyed everything. My business contacts won't take my calls. Our accounts are frozen. Even Beatrice's social circle has abandoned her. Because he's ruthless. Isabella spat. The perfect gentleman act was just that. An act underneath. He's a monster. No, her father corrected quietly. He's what we created. We tried to destroy him. And now he's returning the favor. Back at Julian's office, Victor received new intelligence. Marcus is starting to crack. He's made calls to 3 different lawyers, looking for deals. Let him squirm, Julian replied. The longer they're trapped together, the more they'll tear each other apart. Richard studied his son's impassive face. You knew they'd break under pressure. People like them always do. They are predators who think they're invincible until someone bigger comes along. Julian's voice carried no emotion. I'm just proving I'm the apex predator. Detective Carter arrived with fresh evidence. We found their previous safe house. Documents scattered everywhere. Looks like they left in a hurry. But we found something interesting. Photographs and detailed plans for your accident. Very detailed plans. Julian examined the documents. Add attempted murder to the charges. Make sure the DA understands they weren't just after money. They're running out of places to hide. Detective Carter noted. The net is getting tighter. Good. Julian's smile held no warmth. Time to spring the trap. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the night sky, its empty windows like vacant eyes. Julian had chosen it carefully, remote enough for privacy, but close enough for a quick police response. Victor's team had spent weeks preparing it, making it appear neglected while installing state-of-the-art surveillance. They took the bait, Victor reported, watching through cameras as a car approached. An anonymous tip about a safe house worked perfectly. Julian straightened his tie. Detective Carter's teams were in position. All exits were covered. They're not getting away this time, Julian declared. Inside the car, Isabella and her accomplices debated their next move. Their appearances had deteriorated further. Designer clothes replaced by whatever they could grab. Their polished facades were cracking under pressure. This doesn't feel right, Marcus protested. It's too convenient. We don't have a choice. Isabella snapped. We're out of money. Out of options. unless you'd rather turn yourself in. They entered the warehouse cautiously, with Spencer leading with a flashlight. The space appeared abandoned, dust covering old machinery and crates. "See." Isabella gestured around. "Perfect hiding spot. We can regroup and figure out our next move." Suddenly, the lights blazed on. Julian stood on a metal walkway above them, looking down with cold amusement. Police officers emerged from hidden positions, weapons raised. "Welcome to the end of your story," Julian announced, his voice echoing. "I thought you'd appreciate the dramatic setting." "You scoundrel!" Spencer began to shout, but froze as a laser sight appeared on his chest. Julian descended the stairs with measured steps. "I wanted you to understand something before you go to prison. You didn't fail because you chose the wrong target. You failed because you underestimated what a man will do when betrayed." "We can make a deal," Marcus pleaded desperately. "I know things. Other schemes." "Quiet," Isabella screamed, but Marcus continued. "It was all your idea. The seduction, the wedding, your downfall." Julian watched their unity crumble with satisfaction. "Detective Carter has all the evidence she needs, but please, continue turning on each other. It's entertaining." Isabella's composure finally shattered. "You think you're so much better than us. You're worse. We just wanted money." "No," Julian corrected. "I want justice. Everything I've done is legal. I just turned your own greed and corruption against you." Detective Carter stepped forward. "Isabella Monroe, Marcus Donovan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and money laundering." As the charges were read, Julian watched his would-be killers transform into common criminals. Isabella fought the handcuffs, screaming threats and accusations. Marcus went quietly, already negotiating. Spencer and her father surrendered with defeated resignation. "How does it feel?" Julian asked Isabella as officers led her away. "Watching your perfect plan collapse." Her response was a snarl of pure hatred, but Julian saw the fear beneath it. She finally understood what she had awakened in him, not just revenge, but ruthless, calculated destruction. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the sentences. Months had passed since the warehouse confrontation, each day revealing new depths to Isabella and Marcus's crimes. Julian sat in the gallery between Richard and Victor, his expression neutral as he watched his former fiancée and her accomplices face justice. Isabella had lost her polished appearance, prison orange replacing her designer labels, and Marcus's charm had withered under the weight of evidence. The defendants have shown no remorse. Their pattern of predatory behavior, culminating in conspiracy to commit murder, demands severe punishment, the judge declared. Isabella Monroe, 25 years. Marcus Donovan, 20 years. In the prosecutor's office afterward, Detective Carter shared the final tallies. With the other victims' cases, they're facing additional charges in 3 states. They'll never scheme again. "What about Beatrice?" Victor asked. "Social ostracism is her punishment," Julian replied. "For someone like her, that's worse than prison." Later, in Julian's office, Richard poured drinks. To justice served. Julian raised his glass, but didn't drink. "Justice is just the beginning. I'm implementing new background check procedures for my company. No one will ever get close enough to try this again." Richard observed, "You've changed." "I had to," Julian said as he moved to the window, surveying the city lights. "They showed me the world's true nature, and now I'm better prepared for it." Victor joined him. "Any regrets?" "Only that I didn't see through them sooner." Julian's reflection showed a harder man than the one who had fallen for Isabella's act, but the lesson was worth the price. The next morning, Julian reviewed architectural plans for a new project. His company had grown stronger through the scandal, his reputation for integrity enhanced by his handling of the betrayal. A news alert caught his attention. Isabella attempting to appeal her sentence. The photo showed her in court, still beautiful but haunted. Julian closed the alert without reading it. She was part of his past, a costly lesson in trust and consequences. Richard found him working late that evening. The old Julian would have been home hours ago. The old Julian died when he read those text messages. Julian replied, "This version is stronger, smarter, ready for whatever comes next." They stood together, father and son, looking out at the city lights. Julian had built his success on talent and hard work, and now he had proven he could protect it with the same dedication. "You know," Richard said quietly, "your mother would have loved seeing her name on a children's hospital." Julian thought of the family values she had instilled: loyalty, honesty, justice, and he had honored those values by refusing to let betrayal go unpunished. The final news reports aired that week. Isabella and Marcus were led away to separate prisons, Spencer and her father accepted plea deals, and Beatrice sold her house, forced to downsize. The society columns that had once celebrated Julian and Isabella's engagement now documented their spectacular fall. In his home office, Julian archived the last of the evidence files. The recordings, photographs, and documents that had exposed their plot would remain as a reminder, not of pain or betrayal, but of his own capacity for ruthless efficiency when crossed. A new invitation arrived. Another charity gala. Julian smiled, remembering where he had first met Isabella. He would attend, but with clear eyes this time. No one would ever mistake his kindness for weakness again. The city stretched before him, full of opportunities and threats. Julian Mercer was ready for both, transformed by betrayal into someone who could face any challenge. Not just a successful architect, but a man who had proven that crossing him was a fatal mistake. He had built his empire brick by brick, and now he had shown he could tear down his enemies with the same precision. The lesson would echo through their social circles for years. Julian Mercer was not a man to be betrayed. 5 years later, the Mercer Architecture Group's new headquarters rose 40 stories into the city skyline, its glass and steel design a testament to power. Julian stood in his top-floor office, now 39, his success evident in the expansion of his empire. The betrayal that had transformed him 5 years ago had also catalyzed his ambition. "The London contract is finalized," his executive assistant reported. "They want you to oversee the project personally." Julian nodded, reviewing the documents. His company now operated internationally, with offices in major cities across 3 continents. The nave architect who had once been targeted by opportunists had become one of the most formidable figures in the industry. "Schedule the meetings for next month, and have security run complete background checks on all project leads," he instructed. His assistant nodded, familiar with Julian's rigorous protocols. After Isabella's betrayal, he had implemented exhaustive screening procedures for anyone who came near his business or personal life. Trust was now something to be earned through extensive verification. Victor Langston entered the office, their friendship stronger than ever, now running the city's premier security and investigation firm. "Just got word from my contact at the state penitentiary," Victor announced. "Isabella's latest appeal was denied. She's serving her full sentence." Julian barely glanced up from his work. And Marcus, still cooperating with the authorities about other scams, had his sentence reduced by a few years. But he'll never work another con. Nobody in those circles will touch him now. The mention of his former fiancée brought no pain anymore. Isabella Monroe had become a cautionary tale in their social circles, the beautiful schemer who targeted the wrong man. Her attempt to destroy Julian had instead destroyed her own world. Beatrice, her mother, had lost the last of her social standing when the Royal Club revoked her membership. She's moving to Florida, trying to rebuild in a new community. "She won't succeed," Julian stated flatly. "I made sure her reputation follows her. No social circle will accept someone who helped plot a murder." Richard Carmichael visited later that day, now semi-retired but still sharp as ever. At 65, he took pride in his son's evolution from victim to victor. The charitable foundation's new wing was set to open next week. "Your mother would have loved seeing her name on a children's hospital," Richard reminded him. Julian's philanthropy had grown alongside his business, but now it came with strict oversight. Every donation was scrutinized, every partnership vetted. He had learned that even charity could be weaponized by the unscrupulous. Detective Amelia Carter called, and Richard mentioned, "She's making chief of police next month. Says your case changed her career, showing how the wealthy could be targeted by sophisticated predators." Detective Carter had indeed risen through the ranks, her handling of the Monroe case establishing her expertise in white-collar crime. She now consulted with Julian's security team, helping other potential victims identify and avoid similar schemes. In prison, Isabella's carefully maintained facade had crumbled completely. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, faded under harsh fluorescent lights and rigid routines. Other inmates knew her story. The failed schemer whose target had proved more dangerous than she'd imagined. She received few visitors. Spencer, her brother, had cut all ties after serving his own shorter sentence, and her father, broken by disgrace, lived quietly in a small apartment, surviving on a modest pension. The glamorous family that had once schemed to infiltrate high society now existed only in fading newspaper clippings. Marcus Donovan's cooperation with authorities had earned him a reduced sentence, but the price was high. Former associates shunned him as an informant. His charming persona, stripped away by years of incarceration, revealed the coward beneath. He spent his days looking over his shoulder, knowing that his testimony had endangered him with dangerous people. Julian's personal life had evolved as well. He dated occasionally, but with calculated caution. Each potential partner faced extensive background checks. His new girlfriend, Olivia Stanton, a successful surgeon, had passed these screenings and understood their necessity. Their relationship moved at a deliberate pace, built on verified trust rather than rushed emotion. "You've become the person they thought they were targeting," Victor observed one evening over drinks. "Someone who can't be conned because he sees through every deception." "I became what I needed to be," Julian replied. "This world preys on the trusting. I chose not to be prey." His company's success spoke to this transformation. The Mercer Architecture Group now specialized in secure facilities. Banks, corporate headquarters, government buildings. Julian's understanding of betrayal had given him insight into protecting against it. The society pages that had once breathlessly covered his engagement to Isabella now documented his rise as a business mogul. Profiles noted his intense focus, his attention to detail, and his unwillingness to leave anything to chance. The words ruthless and calculating appeared frequently, meant as compliments in the cutthroat world of international business. Richard watched his son's evolution with mixed emotions. Julian's success was undeniable, his revenge complete, but the warm, trusting man he had once been had been replaced by someone harder, colder, and more formidable. "Do you ever regret not just turning them in immediately?" Richard asked once. "No," Julian answered without hesitation. They needed to understand consequences, real consequences, not just legal ones. They needed to feel what it's like to have their world destroyed by someone they underestimated. The lesson had resonated beyond Isabella and her accomplices. Julian's revenge had become a warning story in wealthy circles, a reminder that not all victims remained victims. Some transformed into something far more dangerous. Olivia observed during dinner at his penthouse, "They tried to use social connections to destroy you, so you use those same connections to destroy them." "I learned from them," Julian acknowledged, "how to identify weaknesses, how to exploit trust, and how to dismantle someone's life piece by piece. I just proved better at it than they were." His new home reflected this evolution. State-of-the-art security systems protected against both physical and electronic intrusion. The warm, welcoming spaces that Isabella once decorated were replaced by a minimalist design that emphasized power and control. Victor's security firm now occupied several floors in Julian's building. Their partnership had expanded, combining Victor's investigative skills with Julian's resources to protect others from sophisticated predators. "We've stopped 12 similar schemes this year," Victor reported. "Amazing how many Isabellas are out there, targeting wealthy marks." "Not so amazing," Julian corrected. Greed is constant. The only variable is whether the target becomes the victim or the victor. Detective Carter's promotion ceremony drew the city's elite. Julian attended, knowing his presence would remind everyone how he had handled his own brush with criminality. His reputation now deterred potential schemers. No one wanted to risk becoming another Isabella Monroe. Your case changed things, Detective Carter told him at the reception. It made people realize that these crimes aren't just about money. They're about destroying lives. They certainly destroyed some lives, Julian agreed. Thinking of Isabella's family, Beatrice's attempt to rebuild in Florida had failed spectacularly. Julian's influence had reached even there, ensuring no social circle would risk accepting her. Spencer, released after 3 years, worked a retail job under her mother's maiden name. His hot temper had cooled in prison, replaced by wary resignation. He had learned the hard way that loyalty to family could be a fatal weakness. Their father lived like a ghost in his small apartment. The formerly proud man reduced to shopping at discount stores and avoiding old acquaintances, his business contacts evaporated and his social standing annihilated. Julian's revenge had been comprehensive, targeting not just the main conspirators, but everyone who enabled them. Olivia accompanied Julian to charity events, understanding his need to maintain social appearances while keeping everyone at a calculated distance. She had seen the newspaper articles about Isabella's trial and understood how completely Julian had destroyed his would-be destroyers. "You never talk about her," Olivia observed one night. "Nothing to talk about," Julian replied. "She was a mistake I corrected. Thoroughly." The thoroughness of that correction became apparent when Isabella's first parole hearing approached. Julian's influence ensured the board received detailed documentation of her crimes, including the murder plot. Parole was denied, and she would serve her full sentence. Marcus, despite his cooperation, faced similar obstacles, his sentence reduced but no real freedom. Former associates watched him constantly, waiting to punish his betrayal. He lived in fear, knowing that his protection from Julian's revenge had cost him protection from his former criminal connections. The Mercer Architecture Group continued its expansion. Julian's new projects emphasized security and control, reflecting the transformation he had undergone. His buildings rose like fortresses of glass and steel, beautiful but impenetrable. "You've built an empire on other people's fear," Richard observed during their weekly dinner. "I built it on understanding human nature," Julian corrected. "People respect strength and ruthlessness. They mistake kindness for weakness. I stopped being kind." This philosophy pervaded every aspect of his life. Employees underwent rigorous screening. Business partners faced extensive background checks, and even charitable donations came with strict conditions and oversight. The transformation that had begun with betrayal was now complete. Julian Mercer had become someone who could never be victimized because he controlled every situation, anticipated every deception, and responded to any threat with overwhelming force. Isabella's cautionary tale lived on in whispered conversations at society events. The beautiful schemer who targeted the wrong man had instead awakened something far more dangerous: his capacity for calculated, ruthless revenge. Her punishment served as a warning to others who might attempt similar schemes. Julian's new office overlooked the city he had helped build, its skyline dotted with his designs. Each building represented not just architectural achievement, but a statement of power. He had transcended the role of victim to become someone his enemies had never imagined. A man who could destroy lives without breaking laws, who could exact revenge through influence rather than violence. "Was it worth it?" Olivia asked him once, "becoming this version of yourself?" Julian considered the question, looking out at his empire of glass and steel. "They thought they were destroying me," he said finally. "But instead, they created someone stronger, someone who understands that trust must be earned, verified, and constantly monitored, someone who never forgives betrayal." The city lights reflected in the window, casting his reflection back at him. The naive architect who had once fallen for a beautiful schemer had become someone entirely different, a man whose very name made potential predators think twice. The price of this transformation had been his innocence, but the result was undeniable. Julian Mercer had not just survived betrayal. He had transformed it into the foundation of an empire built on the understanding that in this world, trust is a weapon, mercy is weakness, and revenge, when properly executed, is an art form. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.